They invaded with fewer than 500 men, no tanks rolling through the capital, no massive army, no epic battlefield, just a radio station, a stack of leaflets, and a secret manual that explained how to make a murder look like an accident. 3 weeks later, Guatemala's president was gone, and a democracy was finished. In 1944, Guatemala did something rare. It overthrew a dictator. The October Revolution ended the long rule of Jorge Ubico and opened what Guatemalans would later call the 10 years of spring. Elections followed, new freedoms, labor rights, political parties. Then, in 1951, a young military officer became president, Jacobo Árbenz Guzman. He wasn't a revolutionary in fatigues. He wore suits, spoke calmly, believed in reform. Not chaos, but one decree changed everything. In 1952, Árbenz signed Decree 900, land reform. About 1.4 million acres of uncultivated land, much of it owned by massive estates, would be redistributed to roughly 500,000 landless peasants. Compensation would be paid, based on the value landowners themselves had declared for taxes. That detail mattered, because one of those landowners was the powerful United Fruit Company, a corporation that didn't just grow bananas. It controlled railroads, ports, telecommunications, vast idle land, and it had influence in Washington. Suddenly, a small Central American democracy had touched something bigger than land. It had touched American corporate power during the Cold War. By 1953, the world was divided. The Soviet Union on one side, the United States on the other. Every reform, every labor union, every left-leaning advisor viewed through a single question: is this communism? Árbenz had legalized the small Guatemalan Party of Labor. Some leftists advised his government. To U.S. officials, that was enough to raise alarms. President Dwight D. Eisenhower authorized a covert operation. Inside the CIA, it had a name: PBSuccess. CIA. Director Allen Dulles oversaw it. His brother, John Foster Dulles, was Secretary of State and had prior legal ties to United Fruit. Was this about communism? Was it about corporate protection? Declassified documents confirmed the CIA planned and executed the operation. The motive? Still debated, but the method? Crystal clear. The invasion force was led by Carlos Castillo Armas, about 480 men. That's it. No massive army. So how did they win? Not with bullets, with fear. The CIA trained and armed the rebels in Honduras and Nicaragua. It launched a fake radio station, The Voice of Liberation, run by CIA officer David Atlee Phillips. It broadcast dramatic reports of imaginary rebel victories, invented troop movements, exaggerated defections. Leaflets rained from the sky. Death threats were circulated. American-piloted aircraft conducted selective bombings and strafing runs. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy enforced a blockade under Operation Hard Rock Baker. Psychological warfare wasn't a sideshow. It was the main event. Guatemala's army, uncertain of U.S. intentions, unsure of Soviet support that never came, began to fracture. The illusion of overwhelming force became reality. On June 18, 1954, the small rebel force crossed the border. 9 days later, Árbenz resigned, not because his army was destroyed, but because morale collapsed. The war had happened mostly in people's heads. In 1997, the CIA declassified more than 1,400 pages related to PBSuccess. Inside the training files was something chilling. A 19-page document titled A Study of Assassination. It described tools, hammers, knives, contrived accidents. Target lists existed. Names were redacted. No documented assassinations by CIA assets occurred during the coup itself, but the planning was real. The paper trail survived, and it revealed something unsettling. Regime change wasn't improvised. It was engineered. After Árbenz fled into exile, a military junta took power. Soon, Castillo Armas was installed as president. Land reform was reversed. Political parties were banned. Unions dismantled. The CIA launched Operation PB History, searching 500,000 documents for proof of Soviet control. They found none. No evidence of a Kremlin-directed takeover. But by then, the government was gone. The model had worked. Small force, big psychological shock, regime change achieved. Washington publicly framed it as a victory against communism. Privately, internal histories acknowledged how fragile and improvised the operation had been. In 1960, civil war erupted. It would last 36 years. An estimated 200,000 people died. The vast majority were civilians. In the 1980s, Maya communities faced genocide-level violence under military regimes. The coup didn't cause every tragedy that followed, but it removed a democratic experiment and replaced it with decades of instability. In 1999, U.S. President Bill Clinton acknowledged American support for violent regimes in Guatemala. In 2011, Guatemalan President Álvaro Colón formally apologized for the 1954 intervention's legacy. History doesn't whisper forever. Eventually, it surfaces. Operation PBSuccess became a template. It influenced later covert actions, including the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. It demonstrated something profound. You don't always need overwhelming force. You need perception, fear, isolation, uncertainty. In 1954, fewer than 500 men toppled a government, but the real weapon wasn't the rebels. It was the story told over the radio, the leaflets drifting from the sky, the belief that resistance was hopeless. The coup succeeded in days. Its consequences lasted generations, and somewhere in a declassified archive, a manual still explains how to make it look like an accident. History rarely announces itself with explosions. Sometimes, it sounds like a voice on the radio telling you the war is already lost.